Exactly 8 years ago, I stood right here in the garden and called my husband Ted, who was 1,700 miles away. I told him we had to buy this house and we had to do it today, even though I had not yet been inside the house. Within 48 hours, we were under contract and I began my love affair with this garden. This is what I was looking at 8 years ago. What did I see that caused me to react so impulsively? That's what we're talking about today, along with how we created these incredible walkways for next to nothing. But when you buy an 80-year-old house with loads of plants everywhere you look, you are adopting a full-grown adult. Like Cinderella and her fairy godmother. That doesn't mean you can't have a major impact. Maybe clean them up, give them some advice and career counseling, steer them in the right direction, work on their wardrobe. If I was going to buy a mature garden, I wanted one that had been deeply loved, was beautiful under the tattered clothing, and got along well with wildlife. This was definitely a Cinderella garden. Since I didn't have a magic wand, how did I begin? The house had been vacant for about 6 months, and once we were under contract, I received permission from the homeowners to walk around the yard. I doubt they thought I would go over every day, but I woke up every morning and rushed over to the house with my gardening notebook to document what was growing. Most of the trees were easy to identify. 3 massive oaks that looked to be several hundred years old, assorted redbuds, dogwoods, crepe myrtles, lots of cedars, plus a few I didn't know. They were all well established and healthy looking. That alone was impressive. Now, the plants I recognized immediately included several shrubs, 2 large yews, a boatload of azaleas, nandinas, lilacs, rose of Sharon, butterfly bush, roses, flowering quince, forsythia, ligustrum. The flowering perennials included daisies, black-eyed Susan, coreopsis, sweet peas, rose campion, Queen Anne's lace, spiderwort, bellflower, bee balm, irises, daylilies, Asiatic lilies. This is essentially what I was able to identify within minutes of stepping into the yard. I confess I love visiting botanical gardens with all those little tags identifying the plants. Yes, I am a plant nerd. As the days passed and the plants came into bloom, I was overwhelmed. That's when I started documenting the plants on a spreadsheet, listing every plant, the common name, scientific name, dates of the first and last blooms, locations in the garden, and any other observation like size, color, or health. I researched any plants I was not familiar with, of which there were many. I identified invasive plants that needed to be pulled out like loosestrife, trumpet vine, kudzu, common honeysuckle, Virginia creeper, to name a few. I decided which vines needed to be reined in, like the English ivy. Now, if you know our story, you might recall that we rented out the house for over a year before we moved in. But we generously offered to provide all landscape services. The new tenants were probably a little surprised to get a full-time gardener. I continued to visit the garden every day, weather permitting, and was stunned by what I found. By the time I finished over a year later, I had identified over 100 individual species of plant, not even counting different varieties and colors. For example, of the 16 or 17 azalea bushes in the yard, there were at least a dozen different varieties. I'm thinking my next video might be my 10 or 15 favorite discoveries from this amazing garden. Plants that were new to me or that I had never seen growing in just a regular person's yard. If you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button. Now, while I was documenting the plants in the yard, I was also thinking about how to tame the wild messiness of the garden. There are still some untidy spots, but we have made so much progress. And truth be told, areas that we thought were under control can suddenly look wild again. Because of the dense growth and shade, we knew we had to do hardscape, which can be either extremely expensive if you hire it out or very time consuming if you do it yourself. We did a combination of both, with the bulk being DIY, which is still not finished. I'm in charge of planting decision, and my husband Ted is in charge of dirt and anything dealing with hardscape. He has a very good eye for design and usually tweaks my ideas, for the better, I have to admit. We make a good team. So just like the fairy godmother thought first about getting Cinderella to the ball, a plain yellow pumpkin can become a golden carriage. It is fitting for us to start with transporting us through the garden. Once those decisions were made, it would be time to work on the beautiful ball gown and the plantings. It's easiest to understand the hardscape if I break it down into 12 unique projects. I have mentioned before that the first thing we did in the garden was the garden shed. We were eliminating the workshop on the deck and did not have a garage, so a garden shed was imperative. The previous owner had a large composting area at the back of the lot, and it was the perfect spot for the shed. Don't worry, we love to compost everything, but our county started offering composting with our garbage collection right at that time. Sometimes the stars just align, and we get free compost. They even provide us with free paper bags if our organics bin is full. Now, back to the garden shed. I found a company on Craigslist that came out and put it up in one day, done by mid-afternoon. I don't remember the price, but it was a few $100s less than Home Depot. We painted it and put on gutters. I chose paint colors and styled it, knowing that I would be able to see it from inside once we finished the remodel. I love the paint color and would definitely do everything again exactly the same way. Now, the pathway in the front yard was a professionally constructed, wheelchair accessible walk built on a cinder block base and topped with sturdy paving bricks joined with a polymeric jointing sand. Essentially, the sand has water-activated glue in it. As many of you already know, our adult son is a quadriplegic and comes over to our house multiple times every week. The entire path was drawn with curves, not angular turns, making it easier to navigate in a chair. But by the time I saw what they were doing, this portion of the ramp with its square angle was already set. But the cement in this turn was still wet. I was very emphatic that it be pulled out and redone with the curve. The bricks on the side serve two purposes: providing an edge for safety and creating the illusion of steps. Since this pathway is used often and has a grade, we could not settle for anything less than the sturdiest construction available. I will talk about the landscaping we changed in another video. The first two projects, the garden shed and the front pathway, needed to be done quickly and up to high standards, so they were obvious choices for professionals. The next hardscape project was on the side of the house, where all that had existed was a dirt path on a dry day and mud on a wet day. It screened for a neat walkway to access the backyard. When they installed the stone veneer on the house, this was where they started, the stonemasons did two things. First, they tore out all the plants in the flower bed that was next to the house without letting me know ahead of time. I would have at least tried to save them. The upside, I was able to stop them before they tore out everything in the front beds. They did cut back the plants in the front bed pretty brutally, but they didn't pull them out. And there was a leftover pile of scrap stone, too small to use on the house, that they were just going to haul away. and it was right here. After asking Ted if he could use the stone for paving, I had them leave it. It all worked out for the best. I would have saved the flower bed, but it is much better as a patio area where we keep the grill and have a sitting area. After the patio on the side of the house was finished, there was still stone left over, so Ted kept going, replacing a lumpy existing path and creating a little alcove for the new bird bath my children got me for Mother's Day the first year after the remodel was finished. We ran out of veneer stone right at the edge of the deck. Just about the time this stone portion was completed, one of our neighbors replaced their lumpy brick driveway with a new poured concrete one. When I saw the bricks piling up in front of their house, I casually walked over and asked what they'd be doing with them, then offered to haul them away at no charge. Not to brag, but I made my husband proud that day. Between my foraged bricks and the random bricks, stones, and cinder blocks found in our yard, we had enough square footage to complete almost all of what we had in mind, but not enough of any one or two or even three materials. This was going to be like vegetable soup. Every veg in the kitchen without a full serving of any. And I knew exactly where to find inspiration. I had Ted look at Linda Vodder's backyard, the way she artfully combined bricks, stones, and gravel. That was all it took, and this is how he combined assorted materials of every flavor imaginable into a beautiful, artistic path, omitting gravel. Now, if any of you have been watching the BBC coverage of the Chelsea Flower Show, you will know that the big trends this year are sustainability and recycling. It's nice to know that trends have finally caught up with me. If you're interested in doing something like this, I will tell you how. First, look for recycled materials in your neighborhood and on Facebook Marketplace. If you need more materials than what you find, just keep acquiring materials until you have the quantity needed. I'll show you how Ted installs them later in the video. The next step was pulling up the narrow pathway that ran along this side of the house and widening enough for our son's wheelchair. In this old photo, you can see where the narrow path runs under the leaves. The new pathways are charming and a bit rustic, but they are wider and much better than gravel, which wheelchairs do not like. The next project was a patio under this beautiful tree. Ted continued with the mixed materials, but the most time-consuming part was removing the plants and the roots and leveling the area. Fortunately, the tree had such deep shade that no valuable plants were growing here, just ground covers and junk trees. If we had not installed the patio, we would have had to replant the area, which would have been difficult because of the deep shade and excessive roots. It was a bit of an eyesore. Now, this is a fabulous place to sit and enjoy views in all directions. The smallest project was this little strip between the corner patio and the shed. There was already a little pathway with mixed materials that was actually pretty decent, just narrow. So Ted widened it, and it has worked well. Then we added another patio in front of the garden shed. I mentioned that the garden shed was the first thing we did in the yard, really the first part of the major remodel. The shed went up long before this patio went in. For 4 years, I dragged the lawnmower through the mud in front of the shed. I plopped down some paving stones so I wouldn't have to step in the mud, but it was not pretty. If you're thinking all these projects happened in one summer or 1 year, you would be delusional. There were hectic years where nothing happened at all, alternating with productive ones. This is the 7th year of our DIYs. If you plan to take on a big project like this, prepare to be patient. The upside? You'll have plenty of time to forage for free materials. The current project is paving on the right side of the shed and behind it, so we will have a place for the trash bin, recycling bin, organics bin, ladders, wheelbarrows, etc., etc. Ted is making good progress, so I can show you how he does it. I first promised this a year ago, and here it is. The first step in this area, like the corner patio, we had loads of growth, including smaller trees and roots that had to be dug out. Ted even found an abandoned animal burrow that had to be filled in. He uses large cinder blocks along some edges and cuts into the soil on the other edges to stabilize the materials side to side. There were also materials sold specifically for this purpose that you can find at a big box store. Step 2, level the ground. A strip of 2x4 drug over the surface is an easy way to identify irregularities. To make sure it will stay level, the ground needs to be compacted. For a large area, you can rent something called a jumping jack soil compactor. A small area like a pathway can be compacted by hand. There is a handheld tool made specifically for this job, but Ted has always used a homemade one like this. Step 3 is to cover the area with paver base and level this the same way. Step 4 can vary. When you're using materials that are all the same thickness, you simply put down a layer of paving sand and leveling it. Are you hearing the word level a lot? If you are creating an intricate pattern or you're using assorted materials, now is the time to lay out your patterns, like what Ted has done here. If you like Tetris, you might actually enjoy doing this. I don't know if you can tell, but the bricks are quite a bit thicker than the cement pavers. Now he is ready for the delicate part of the job, leveling each piece individually. He likes to start with the thicker pieces, using a layer of paver sand to make them level. There's that word again. You can see him create what is basically a frame of bricks, then use the paving sand and the darker paving base as needed to make the surface flat. Do notice how he always compresses the dark paver base if he adds or takes away any of it. Then the paving sand is spread. This is very satisfying to watch up at high speed. Step 5 is just tweaking any pieces that have shifted before sweeping the paver sand into the open spaces. He then uses water to make sure the sand is filling all the vacant spaces completely and applies more sand as needed. One of the advantages to a technique like this is that the surface absorbs rainfall. This is one of the features of sustainable design, so popular at the Chelsea Flower Show this year. The next project, this is 10 if you're counting, is a path up to the back door. Personally, I would just add some fresh gravel and leave the small steps, but he wants to make it wheelchair accessible. When he gets a bee in his bonnet, I've learned to just accept it. The final project, number 11, is a small path through the little shade garden on the far side of the house. This should be the easiest project since there are already some steps existing. One hardscape project that came out of order is the small patio where the steps from our bedroom come down. My sweet husband indulged me. A few months after we finished our remodel, my elderly mother's health made it impossible for her to live alone any longer. Fortunately, my mother and my husband are two of the nicest people ever and actually loved each other. He was happy to have her move in with us and never complained about giving up our bedroom. My mother loved everything to do with gardens, so I had visions of her stepping outside the bedroom door and sitting in the garden. I placed old cinder block pavers in my unprofessional manner just outside the bedroom door, thinking she would want to sit outside every day. Predictably, my husband spent a few days redoing it because it was not up to his standards. But she was weaker than I knew, so she sat in the chair beside the French door and watched me and the critters in the garden. She loved watching me work in the garden. I think she must have vicariously felt like she was still working in the garden. She was in her 90s when she died 2 years ago, and we are so grateful we could spend those last years with her. I love the way the cinder block up here has been covered by moss. Now, this brickwork here was existing when we purchased the house. So there it is, the structure of the garden, almost finished. Do you feel like you've gotten a lot of work done today? Now, all along, I have been working with the plants, dividing and transplanting, cutting back and removing the less than desirable growth, buying plants to supplement the original garden. In future videos, I will share different areas in the garden, what was original and what we changed. Let me know which areas you're most interested in seeing first. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.